Marcus Chen's coffee mug slipped from his fingers and shattered against the kitchen tile as he stared through his back window at what had once been his pride and joy, where his meticulously maintained Japanese garden should have been, where his brand-new stone patio should have showcased the outdoor furniture he'd spent months selecting. There was now a lake, an actual, honest-to-God lake sitting in his backyard like some cruel joke from the universe. "What the hell?" he muttered, yanking open the sliding door and stepping onto what used to be his deck. The water lapped at the bottom step, murky brown and filled with floating debris that he slowly realized were pieces of his prized koi pond bridge and the delicate cherry blossom petals from his ornamental tree. The weekend getaway to his sister's wedding in Portland was supposed to have been relaxing. 72 hours of family time, good food, and a break from his demanding job as a software architect. Instead, he returned to find his property transformed into a disaster zone that would make Fime weep. Marcus rolled up his pants and waded into the mess, his heart sinking further with each step. The custom flagstone patio he'd saved for 2 years to install was completely submerged. His grandmother's antique garden bench, the one piece he kept after her passing, sat half-drowned like a shipwreck. Worse yet, he could see water stains on his basement workshop windows, which meant the flooding had reached the foundation. $20,000. That's what the landscaping had cost him. Another $15,000 for the patio, and God only knew how much damage had been done to his basement, where he kept his vintage guitar collection and woodworking tools. Insurance is going to love this, he said to himself, pulling out his phone to document the carnage. As he snapped photos, something caught his eye. The angle of the water flow didn't make sense. His property sat on a natural slope that should have drained water away from the house, not toward it. The Japanese maple he planted last spring was getting pelted by a steady stream of water that seemed to be coming from. Marcus looked up and felt his blood pressure spike. There, clear as day, was a garden sprinkler head mounted on his neighbor's fence, pointed directly at his yard. Not just any neighbor, Karen Morrison, the 50-something HOA board member who'd made his life hell for the past 6 months, over everything from his non-regulation mailbox to his excessive holiday decorations. "You've got to be kidding me," he breathed, marching closer. He had better look. The sprinkler wasn't just running, it had been deliberately repositioned. The mounting bracket was turned at an unnatural angle, clearly adjusted to direct maximum water flow onto his property rather than Karen's pristine lawn. His phone buzzed with a text from his contractor friend Dave. "How'd the patio turn out? Send pics." Marcus almost laughed at the irony as he typed back, "You're not going to believe this." But before he could send another message, his security system app chimed with a notification. The motion-activated cameras he'd installed after Karen's last complaint about his loud lawnmower had been triggered multiple times over the weekend. His hands trembling with a mixture of rage and anticipation, Marcus opened the app and scrolled back to Saturday morning. There she was in glorious high-definition color. Karen Morrison, wearing her signature pink tracksuit and wielding a wrench like some suburban saboteur. The timestamp showed 6:47 a.m., merely an hour after he left for the airport. She was adjusting something on the fence, and when she stepped back, Marcus could see exactly what she'd done. The woman had systematically redirected not one, not two, but 4 different sprinkler heads to create a coordinated assault on his property. The footage showed her checking her work, hands on her hips, with what could only be described as a satisfied smirk. Then she'd simply walked back to her house, leaving the sprinklers to run for the entire weekend while he was gone. Marcus saved the footage to his cloud storage, his mind already working through the implications. This wasn't just petty neighbor drama anymore. This was thousands of dollars in property damage, and he had the evidence to prove it was deliberate. Karen had finally gone too far, and she was about to discover that Marcus Chen wasn't the type of man to take this lying down. As he stood in his flooded yard, watching his dreams literally wash away, Marcus felt something cold and calculating settle in his chest. Karen wanted to play games with water? Fine, but she just picked a fight with someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't served cold, it was served soaking wet. Marcus didn't bother knocking. He marched straight up to Karen Morrison's pristine front door and jabbed the doorbell 3 times in rapid succession, his laptop tucked under one arm and righteous fury radiating from every pore. The melodic chimes seemed to mock him as he stood there, water still dripping from his shoes onto her immaculate welcome mat. When the door finally opened, Karen appeared in all her manufactured innocence, perfectly styled blonde hair, pastel cardigan, and that practiced smile she reserved for HOA meetings and charity events. "Oh, Marcus, what a pleasant surprise. I heard you were out of town." "Cut the act, Karen." He pushed past her into the foyer without invitation, ignoring her indignant gasp. "We need to talk. Now." Her living room was everything his flooded yard wasn't, pristine, organized, and bone-dry. Cream-colored furniture arranged with mathematical precision, family photos in matching frames, and not a single thing out of place. It was the kind of sterile perfection that made Marcus's teeth itch on a good day. Today, it made him want to break something. I really don't appreciate you barging into my home like this, Karen said, following him with her arms crossed. If you have an issue, you should go through proper channels. Proper channels? Marcus spun around and opened his laptop on her coffee table, not caring about the coasters. Like this proper channel? He hit play on the security footage, and Karen's face went white as she watched herself systematically destroying his property. For a moment, blessed silence filled the room. Marcus watched her expression cycle through surprise, calculation, and finally settle on defiance. It was fascinating, really, watching someone decide in real time to double down on their lies. I don't know what you think that proves, she said finally, lifting her chin. I was simply adjusting my irrigation system. If some water happened to spray onto your property, well, that sounds like an accident to me. Marcus felt his jaw clench so hard he thought his teeth might crack. An accident? Karen, you redirected 4 sprinkler heads to run for 3 straight days. My basement is flooded. My patio is destroyed. We're talking about $25,000 in damage. She shrugged with theatrical nonchalance. Accidents happen. Maybe if you hadn't put up that ridiculous fence without proper HOA approval, blocking my view of the mountains, we wouldn't be having this conversation. That fence is completely legal, and you know it. I followed every regulation. Did you? Karen's smile turned predatory. Because I've been doing some research and I found several violations on your property, that workshop in your basement. Pretty sure it's not up to code. And your garbage cans are consistently put out 12 hours early. Your grass is half an inch too tall, according to HOA standards. Should I go on? Marcus stared at her, genuinely amazed at the audacity. Are you threatening me? I'm simply pointing out that neighbors who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. She moved to her front window and gestured toward his soggy yard. Besides, it looks like Mother Nature took care of your little landscaping project for you. Maybe now you'll plant something more suitable for the neighborhood aesthetic. You're insane. The words came out flat, final. Marcus had dealt with difficult clients, demanding bosses, and impossible deadlines, but he'd never encountered someone so brazenly, unapologetically awful. You deliberately flooded my property, and you're proud of it. Prove it wasn't an accident. Karen's voice was sing-song sweet. Oh wait, you can't. Because accidents don't require proof of intent, do they? Marcus closed his laptop slowly, his mind working. In his 15 years as a software architect, he learned to recognize when a system was irreparably broken. Some bugs couldn't be patched. Sometimes you had to rebuild from the ground up. You know what, Karen? You're absolutely right. He stood, tucking the laptop back under his arm. Her satisfied smirk faltered slightly at his sudden calm. Accidents do happen. And you know what's funny about accidents? What? She asked warily. They have a tendency to happen to people who cause them for others. Marcus headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Karen, you might want to check your homeowner's insurance policy. Make sure your coverage is up to date. You never know when you might need it. The color drained from her face. Is that a threat? Just friendly neighbor advice. Marcus smiled for the first time since he'd gotten home. After all, we wouldn't want any accidents to happen to your beautiful home, would we? He left her standing in her perfect living room, and as he walked back across the street, Marcus could feel her eyes boring into his back. Let her wonder. Let her worry. Because while Karen Morrison thought she was playing checkers, Marcus was already 3 moves ahead in a chess game she didn't even know had started. By the time he reached his front door, his phone was already ringing. Dave, his contractor friend. Dude, I saw your pictures. That's insane. Want me to come take a look at the damage? Actually, Dave, I need to ask you something else first. Marcus stepped inside and closed the door, watching Karen's house through his window. You know about drainage systems, right? Specifically, how they work between properties? Sure, why? Marcus smiled grimly, because I think it's time I learned about the wonderful world of water management. And Dave, I'm going to need you to be very thorough in your explanation. As Karen's curtains twitched across the street, Marcus felt the cold satisfaction of a plan beginning to form. She wanted to play with water, fine, but she just made one critical error. She picked a fight with someone who actually understood how to engineer a solution. Dave Rodriguez arrived at Marcus's house the next morning with a toolbox, a tablet full of drainage software, and the kind of enthusiasm that only came from a contractor who'd heard a really good revenge story. He stood in Marcus's soggy backyard, hands on his hips, surveying the damage with the practiced eye of someone who's seen water win far too many battles against human ambition. Okay, so let me get this straight, Dave said, pulling up property records on his tablet. Your psycho neighbor deliberately flooded your yard, refuses to pay for damages, and is now threatening you with HOA violations. That's the short version, yeah. Marcus kicked at a waterlogged chunk of his former patio. I need to know everything about how water moves between our properties. Everything. Dave grinned and pulled up a detailed topographical map. Oh, this is going to be good. See, Marcus, your neighbor Karen made one tiny little mistake when she decided to wage water warfare. Which is, she picked a fight with physics. Dave zoomed in on their section of the neighborhood, highlighting elevation lines and drainage patterns. Look at this. Your property sits about 18 inches higher than hers, and there's a natural slope that directs water flow toward your yard. But here's the kicker. That's not an accident. Marcus leaned in, studying the colorful overlay on Dave's screen. What do you mean? When this neighborhood was developed in 1987, the original drainage system was designed to channel runoff from all these properties into a retention pond 2 blocks over. But Karen's house? Dave tapped the screen with obvious delight. Karen's house has been modified. Modified how? Somebody, and I'm betting it was a previous owner, not Karen, installed an illegal French drain system that redirects water from her foundation toward your property. They basically turned your yard into a personal flood buffer. Dave pulled up more documents. It's actually pretty clever engineering if you ignore the fact that it's completely against city code. Marcus felt a slow smile spread across his face. So she's been illegally draining water onto my property for years? Gets better. See this. Dave showed him a satellite image from Google Earth, dated 3 years earlier. Her basement was expanded without permits. The excavation they did eliminated the natural drainage swale that used to channel water around her foundation. Instead of fixing it properly, they just redirected the problem to my yard. Bingo, which means every time it rains, water that should naturally flow around her property instead pools against her foundation and then gets artificially channeled onto yours through that illegal drain system. Dave looked up from his tablet with barely contained glee. Marcus, my friend, Karen has been committing drainage fraud for years. She just never had a problem because you've been unknowingly acting as her personal storm water management system. Marcus walked to the edge of his property, studying the fence line with new eyes. So theoretically, if I were to do some legitimate landscaping on my own property, you could restore the natural drainage patterns, sure. It's your land. Dave joined him, pointing to various spots along the boundary. So you got depression there. That's where the original swale ran before it got diverted. A little strategic regrading, maybe some French drains of your own, properly permitted, of course, and water would flow exactly where nature intended it to go. Which is, around her foundation instead of away from it. Dave's grin was positively wolfish. Marcus, if you restore the natural drainage on your property, Karen's basement is going to turn into an indoor swimming pool the next time it rains hard. Marcus felt that cold satisfaction settling in his chest again. And this would all be completely legal? Not only legal, but you'd actually be correcting an environmental violation. The city would probably give you a Good Neighbor award. Dave started taking measurements along the fence line. Plus, fixing proper drainage would increase your property value and prevent future flooding. It's a win-win situation. For me. Well, yeah, for Karen, it's more of a learn why you don't mess with water systems situation. They spent the next 3 hours mapping out the perfect drainage solution. Dave explained how water naturally wanted to flow, showed Marcus where strategic landscaping could guide that flow, and detailed exactly how to restore the original drainage patterns without technically doing anything malicious. It was all completely above board, environmentally sound, and utterly devastating to Karen's illegal water management system. The beauty of this plan, Dave said as they wrapped up, is that you're not attacking her. You're just fixing your own property. The fact that it happens to expose her illegal modifications, well, that's just Mother Nature taking her course. Marcus watched Karen's house through the fence, noting how her foundation sat in what should have been a natural drainage channel. How long would this take to implement? 2 weeks for permits, another week for the actual work. But Marcus, Dave's expression turned serious. You need to know that this isn't just going to cause some minor basement dampness. When the next big storm hits, we're talking about serious flooding. Her foundation could be compromised. This could force her to tear up her basement and start over. Good. The word came out harsher than Marcus intended, but he didn't take it back. She destroyed 25 grand worth of my property and threatened to make my life hell with false HOA complaints. She chose this fight. Just making sure you understand the stakes. Dave started packing up his equipment. Because once we do this, there's no going back. Karen's going to know exactly who fixed her little drainage problem. Marcus looked at his waterlogged yard, thinking about his grandmother's ruined garden bench, his destroyed patio, his flooded basement workshop. Then he thought about Karen's smug smile as she claimed it was all an accident. Dave, I want you to file those permits first thing Monday morning. And make sure everything is documented properly. When Karen's basement floods, I want a paper trail showing that every single thing we did was not only legal, but necessary to correct existing violations. You got it, boss. Dave headed for his truck, then paused. "Oh, and Marcus, you might want to check the weather forecast. We're supposed to get some heavy rains next week." As Dave drove away, Marcus stood in his soggy yard and smiled. Karen thought she was clever, using water as a weapon. But she'd made one fatal miscalculation. She'd assumed Marcus would just take it lying down. Instead, she'd given him the motivation to discover that her entire house was built on a foundation of lies, illegal modifications, and redirected water that was about to come flowing right back where it belonged. Let it rain. Marcus was sipping his morning coffee and watching the Weather Channel with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for Christmas morning. The meteorologist's excited chatter about the incoming storm system had him practically giddy. "Unprecedented rainfall totals," she was saying. "We're looking at 3 to 4 inches in the first hour alone, with sustained heavy precipitation throughout the evening." Perfect. It had been exactly 2 weeks since Dave finished the drainage restoration project. 2 weeks of Karen shooting suspicious glares across the fence line as perfectly legal, properly permitted landscaping took shape in Marcus's yard. She even called the city twice to complain, only to be told that Mr. Chen's drainage improvements were not only legitimate but environmentally beneficial. The French drains were hidden beneath strategically placed river rock and made of plants. The restored swales looked like natural landscape features. To anyone driving by, Marcus had simply created an award-worthy xerographic garden that happened to channel water flow exactly where nature had originally intended, around Karen's foundation instead of away from it. His phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "Storm tracking right on schedule. How's it feel to be Mother Nature's favorite son?" Marcus was typing back when the first fat raindrops hit his window. Showtime. He positioned himself in his home office, which had a perfect view of Karen's house, and settled in to watch justice served at approximately 3 inches per hour. The rain started gently, just a typical Pacific Northwest drizzle. But within 30 minutes, it was coming down in sheets that turned the street into a river and sent normal people scurrying indoors. Marcus watched the water flow down his newly graded yard, following the gentle channels Dave had carved, moving around his house and toward the natural drainage corridor that ran along the property line. For the first time in years, not a single drop was pooling against his foundation. Karen's house, however, was a different story entirely. At first, everything looked normal. But as the rain intensified, Marcus could see water beginning to collect in the depression where her foundation sat, the same depression that had been artificially draining toward his property for years. The illegal French drain system that had been secretly diverting her water problems was now backing up with nowhere to go except around her basement walls. Marcus' doorbell rang at exactly 4:47 p.m., just as the storm reached its peak intensity. Through a security camera, he could see Karen standing on his porch, soaked to the bone and looking frantic. Her perfect blonde hair was plastered to her head, her pastel cardigan dripping, and her expression was pure panic. He let it ring. She tried again, this time holding the button down for a full 10 seconds. When that didn't work, she started pounding on the door. "Marcus, I know you're in there. This is an emergency." He made another cup of coffee and returned to his window. From his vantage point, he could see water literally pouring around the base of Karen's house. Her perfectly manicured flower beds had become rushing streams. Her basement window wells were completely submerged. His phone started ringing, Karen's number. He declined the call and watched it immediately ring again. And again. By the 5th call, she apparently given up and was standing in her driveway, screaming at his house through the rain. "I know this is your fault. Fix it. Fix it right now." But Marcus was already backing out of his garage, having grabbed his overnight bag and laptop. As he drove past Karen's house, he could see her in the rain, frantically trying to divert water with a snow shovel, a futile gesture against the laws of physics and hydrology. Her front yard was starting to resemble the lake as had been 2 weeks ago, except this water had nowhere to go except through her foundation and into her basement. He rolled down his window as he passed. "Everything okay, Karen? Looks like you're having some drainage issues." The look of pure rage on her face was absolutely priceless. Marcus drove to Dave's house across town, where they spent the evening monitoring weather reports and sharing a very expensive bottle of whiskey. Dave had thoughtfully set up a webcam overlooking the neighborhood, and they watched in real time as Karen's perfect world literally crumbled around her. By 8 p.m., there were emergency vehicles in her driveway. By 9 p.m., a city inspector's truck had arrived. By 10 p.m., Karen was standing on her front lawn with a clipboard, talking to what appeared to be her insurance adjuster, while water continued to pour out of her basement window wells. "Think she's figured it out yet?" Dave asked, refilling their glasses. "Oh, she figured it out the moment the first drop hit her basement." Marcus raised his glass in a toast. "The question is whether she's figured out that there's absolutely nothing she can do about it." His phone had been buzzing nonstop for hours, missed calls and increasingly desperate text messages from Karen. The latest batch was particularly entertaining. "This is your fault. You did something to cause this. I'm calling my lawyer. The city inspector wants to talk to you. Marcus, please just call me back." He showed the messages to Dave, who nearly choked on his whiskey laughing. You know what the best part is? Dave wiped tears from his eyes. She can call every lawyer in the state. You restored natural drainage patterns on your own property with proper permits. There's literally no law against letting water flow where gravity wants to take it. Marcus's phone rang again, this time an unknown number. "Mr. Chen, this is Inspector Williams with the City Planning Department. I'm at your neighbor's property investigating some flooding issues, and I need to ask you a few questions about your recent drainage improvements." "Of course, Inspector. Though I should mention I'm out of town on business until tomorrow. Will that work?" "That's fine. Actually, sir, I wanted to commend you on the work you had done. Your contractor followed all regulations perfectly, and frankly, your drainage system is exactly what we wish more homeowners would install. It appears your neighbor's property has some irregularities that your improvements have brought to light." Marcus smiled into the phone. "Irregularities?" "Illegal modifications to the original drainage plan, unpermitted basement expansion, and what appears to be an unauthorized French drain system that was directing water onto your property. We're going to need to investigate further, but I wanted you to know that your improvements aren't causing the flooding. They're simply revealing problems that have existed for years." After hanging up, Marcus and Dave sat in comfortable silence, watching the rain continue to fall through the webcam feed. Karen's house looked like a disaster zone, with emergency pumps running and city vehicles blocking her driveway. "You know," Jay said thoughtfully, "I've been in construction for 20 years, and I've never seen karma work quite this efficiently." Marcus nodded, thinking about his grandmother's ruined garden bench, his destroyed patio, and Karen's smug smile as she claimed it was all an accident. Tomorrow, he'd drive home to his properly drained, flood-free property while Karen dealt with the consequences of years of illegal water theft. The rain was supposed to continue for another 12 hours. Sweet dreams, Karen. 3 months later, Marcus stood in his restored backyard, admiring the way morning sunlight filtered through the leaves of his newly planted Japanese maple. His grandmother's antique garden bench, professionally restored and better than ever, sat perfectly positioned beside the rebuilt koi pond. The new patio gleamed with sealed flagstone that would last decades, and his basement workshop was not only dry but had been upgraded with better ventilation and lighting thanks to the insurance payout. The house across the street stood empty, a sold sign hanging crookedly in the overgrown front yard. "Heard Karen's place finally closed escrow yesterday," Dave called out, climbing over the fence with 2 cups of coffee. It had become their Saturday morning ritual. Coffee in Marcus's perfectly drained garden, catching up on neighborhood gossip and admiring their handiwork. 20% below market value, Marcus replied, accepting the coffee with a satisfied smile. Turns out recent flood damage and foundation issues don't exactly boost property values. The aftermath had been even more spectacular than Marcus had dared hope. The city's investigation into Karen's illegal modifications had uncovered violations dating back 15 years. Not only had she been illegally diverting water onto his property, but her unpermitted basement expansion had violated setback requirements, her foundation work had been done without proper inspection, and her French drain system had been contaminating the neighborhood's groundwater flow. The fines alone had cost her $43,000. "Did you hear what happened with the HOA thing?" Dave asked, settling onto the bench. Marcus grinned. "Which part?" "The part where they investigated her harassment complaints and found out she'd been filing false reports for years, or the part where they discovered she'd been selectively enforcing rules to target neighbors she didn't like?" "I was thinking about the part where they kicked her off the board and fined her for abuse of power." Dave chuckled. "But honestly, all of it was pretty satisfying." It turned out that Karen's vendetta against Marcus hadn't been an isolated incident. Once the HOA started investigating her complaints, a pattern emerged. She'd been systematically harassing anyone who didn't conform to her vision of neighborhood perfection. The retired teacher whose rose garden was too colorful. The young couple whose children were too loud playing in their own backyard. The elderly man whose medical equipment delivery trucks were disrupting the aesthetic. When the board reviewed her complaints against Marcus, the non-regulation mailbox that was actually standard issue, the excessive holiday decorations that consisted of 3 tasteful window wreaths, the too tall grass that measured exactly 2 3/4 inches, they realized they'd been enabling a petty tyrant for years. "Best part was the emergency HOA meeting," Marcus said, remembering the chaos that had erupted when Karen's victims all showed up together for the first time. When Mrs. Henderson started reading that list of all Karen's complaints, and everyone realized they'd been dealing with the same person. Mob justice, suburban style. Dave raised his coffee mug in a toast to the power of community organizing. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his real estate agent. New neighbors moving in Monday. The Johnsons seemed lovely, 2 kids, a golden retriever, and they specifically mentioned wanting to meet the neighbor with the gorgeous garden. New neighbors coming Monday, Marcus told Dave. family with kids and a dog. Think they'll appreciate your drainage expertise? I certainly hope they won't need it. Marcus looked across at the empty house, thinking about the irony of it all. Karen had spent months trying to make his life miserable over imaginary violations and aesthetic preferences. In the end, her own illegal shortcuts and vindictive behavior at cost for everything. The insurance battle alone had been legendary. Karen's homeowner's policy had refused to cover flood damage caused by illegal modifications to drainage systems, leaving her to pay for basement restoration, foundation repair, and mold remediation out of pocket. The total bill had exceeded $80,000, more than 3 times what she caused in damage to Marcus' property. When she tried to sue Marcus for deliberately causing flooding, her lawyer had taken one look at the city inspector's report and the drainage permits and quietly suggested she drop the case. It's hard to claim damages when your opponent was literally following the law while you've been breaking it for over a decade. You know what I think the real kicker was? Dave mused, watching a pair of cardinals splash in Marcus's new fountain. She could have just apologized. After you showed her the video, if she'd said, "I'm sorry, I was angry about the fence and I made a stupid mistake. Let me pay for the damage," this whole thing would have blown over. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, but that would have required her to admit she was wrong. And Karen Morrison was constitutionally incapable of admitting fault. "Pride goeth before the fall," Dave quoted, or in this case, "pride goeth before the flood." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle trickle of water through Marcus's perfectly engineered drainage system. The sound was soothing, peaceful, nothing like the rushing torrent that had destroyed Karen's basement and everything in it. Her family photos, her pristine furniture, her collection of HOA meeting minutes dating back to 1995. All of it had been claimed by the very element she'd weaponized against him. "Think she learned anything from all this?" Dave asked. Marcus considered the question as he watched water flow smoothly through the channels that had been designed to work with nature instead of against it. "I think Karen learned that actions have consequences. Whether she learned anything deeper than that," he shrugged. "Not my problem anymore." His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his insurance company confirming the final payment for his property restoration. Between the insurance settlement and the increase in his property value from the professional landscaping, Marcus had actually come out ahead financially. His yard was more beautiful than ever, his drainage system was perfect, and his basement workshop was now a showcase of what could be accomplished with proper planning and execution. "You know what the best part is?" Marcus said, raising his coffee mug. "I never have to think about Karen Morrison again. She's gone, her problems are gone, and I get to enjoy my garden in peace. To water flowing where it's supposed to flow," Dave toasted. "And to neighbors who understand that what goes around comes around," Marcus replied. As they clinked mugs, Marcus caught sight of a moving truck turning onto their street. The new neighbors were arriving early, and from his window he could see children's bicycles and what looked like gardening supplies being unloaded. Maybe he'd introduce himself later, share some tips about the neighborhood's drainage patterns. After all, he learned more about water management in the past few months than most people learned in a lifetime. But for now, he was content to sit in his perfectly dry garden, listening to the peaceful sound of water flowing exactly where physics and gravity intended it to go. While somewhere across town, Karen Morrison dealt with the soggy consequences of thinking she could fight both. The house across the street would get new owners, new landscaping, and eventually proper drainage. The neighborhood would return to normal, minus one HOA tyrant and plus several $1,000s in Marcus's property value. Sometimes Marcus reflected the best revenge really was living well and understanding hydroengineering.